Hello, everybody. My name is Stacey Marie Ishmael. Thank you to all of you for being here this evening, and thank you for the opportunity to fulfill a lifelong dream of doing something cool at the New York Public Library. So, and take that off the list. This evening, we're going to talk at intervals about the paths into media, communications, journalism, newsrooms. Hopefully, one of the things that you'll take away from this is that we've all had very different jobs, and we all have very different jobs. And you've got folks who have spent their careers in New York, and others who've lived in like 4 or 5 countries, and have switched between, broadcast or freelance and full time. So, I think a key thing to really understand about media in 2022, you got a little hint of it, is like, yes, there are layoffs, yes, there's total chaos in the world, and also there are a lot of interesting things that are happening, and some of those interesting things will be things that don't even necessarily exist right now. I was half expecting you to say, follow us on TikTok, which 3 years ago, no media organization was really aware of, and now you have folks like the Washington Post who have an entire TikTok team that is bigger than the social media teams at other organizations. So before we dive in, it's going to be my absolute pleasure to just say a couple of words about each of our panelists. And I'm going to start with Alvin exclusively because it's an excuse to share a book anecdote because we're in a library. So Alvin is the executive producer for the Race and Culture unit over at CBS News. And in addition to having kind of an impressive and an illustrious career, which we'll hear all about, he's got 2,000 books. And why? Yes, please answer that question. How is it that you found it yourself?
Did you just ask why someone would have 2,000
As a
books
person
in a
who
library?
has not as many books as that and understands what it's like to have a book habit, I'm still going to ask you the question.
Because books, reading is really the first part of journalism, all right? I mean, if you can read, then you can write. And if you can read and write, then you can speak, and you can be a journalist, and you can do a lot of things. So it's where we get all of our knowledge.
This is also how I'm going to justify my ongoing book buying to my family. So thank you, Alvin. Ramon, I'm going to go to you. You are currently the Senior Vice President for Talent Recruitment and Development at CNN Worldwide, which, just happens to be one of the largest media organizations in the whole world. So share just a little bit about what that's like for you right now, given everything happening over there.
Well, I mean, the way I want to start is, you know what that's like? It's pretty darn exciting because when I look out into this crowd and I think about New York City, and I think about my mom and dad who came to this country from Latin America, and my mom came from Colombia and opened up a restaurant in Jackson Heights, Queens. Where are my Queens folks?
Yes.
Yeah, give it up for Queens, baby. Y vino a este país y abrió un restaurante porque no tenían nada más. So I thought this was bilingual. So, I mean, they came with nothing. They were poor. They really wanted to put their kids through school, and they did. And so when you ask me that question, I can't stop but think about where I came from and my family coming to this country with nothing, getting an opportunity both in the South and then here in New York City. And it means a lot to me to be in this city, to be talking to students from this city, because this city gave my family the opportunity to send a kid to school and now be here working at CNN. And so it means a lot to me, and I hope a lot of you, thank you, but I hope a lot of you realize that this is one of the greatest professions in the world. You talk about, what Alvin said. You're right on the first draft of history. You're seeing things happen. And if you're lucky, you're playing a role and having an impact on communicating and sharing information with people. When I grew up, no one who looked like me was doing anything on television that was remotely good, and I knew that was not accurate. Right? That not all of us who were brown or black were criminals or selling drugs or buying drugs or having nothing but disaster perpetrated upon them, either by people who looked like me or being done to people like me. And I knew that was inaccurate. So that's why I pursued this profession, was because I wanted to play a role in righting that wrong and really shining a light on the images and the words and the stories of who we really are. And so I've had the privilege of doing that at CNN now for 10 years. And I have a seat at the table. I report to the president of CNN, to the chairman of CNN. I oversee all the recruitment of our talent across the world, all our anchors, all our correspondents, all our reporters, as well as our behind the scenes executive producers, great folks like these folks here who I'd love to steal over to CNN. Part of why I came here to meet them. And so that's my role. And my background really was a kid looking up and seeing television, reading newspaper articles that were inaccurate and weren't reflective. And that's why I pursued it. And it is a fantastic profession. It's a hard one. But I think you'll hear today perhaps some thoughts about how we can help you navigate it.
And Sabina, you are a coordinating producer and also head of the Race and Culture unit at ABC News. But before that, you have had an extensive freelance career. You have created work and been a part of work that does exactly what our colleague here is describing around like showing different kinds of stories. How did you find yourself in this industry?
Well, I started off being a ballerina, actually, and which is completely different. But according to my childhood friends, I was born in Stockholm, Sweden, from a refugee mom from Eritrea, who was from Sudan because her family had moved to Sudan. Apparently, when I was young, at 14, I used to go around with a camera in Sweden. And I would tell everyone how one day I would be working for ABC, CNN, or NBC, or CBS, one of the biggest networks in America, because I wanted to make an impact. So I think that's where I found myself, basically packing a backpack full of dreams and headed over here at, I believe I was 18 or 19 years old.
That is such a powerful metaphor. I'm going to have to take that in the notes. That is incredible. That is incredible. And certainly, just in the few minutes that all of you have been talking, hopefully one of the things that comes out, again, in addition to the multiplicity of paths, it's also just this idea of having a sense of conviction about something. And that's something I want us to explore. We're here in a media environment in which kind of like the capital D word for diversity gets thrown around a lot. And it can mean lots of different things to lots of different people. And I would say we've been in media collectively like a reasonable amount of time. Let's not name names or ages, but we've been around. And there are these waves, right, where it's a bad thing will happen. People will be like, oh no, maybe we should have hired some black people or some brown people or some Spanish speakers so that we can stop that bad thing from happening. And then they'll hire some of us, and then a couple of years will pass and another bad thing will happen and be like, oh, we didn't hire any Asians, so now we're unprepared for the bad thing. And so, like media organizations and media in general tends to approach the telling of our stories in a very cyclical way. And they're often, preempted by, as you put it so eloquently, like the tragedy befalling us or us reacting to something that's happening. In the roles that you all have, you have the ability to not just like change the conversation, not just be at the table, but like decide what the table is even made of. How are you helping people change that lens away from like a reaction to a bad thing to like, this is a baseline that we're going to be doing and it's important because, and I'll start with you.
Well, I mean, without sounding like a shill for my company,
Each of you gets one shill. You've used up your shill. So.
The CBS News Race and Culture Unit, which I had, really is groundbreaking, and it's groundbreaking for a couple reasons. The first reason that it's groundbreaking is because historically, and I guess the major networks have been around for 75, 80, 85 years. Historically, story reviews and editorial decisions go through our legal department as well as our standards department. Mm-hmm. And what we've done at CBS News is we've created this unit. I should say I founded the unit, but we created this unit to be part of that conversation. So every script that goes through CBS News, every story that goes through CBS News is now seen by the standards department, the legal department, and the race and culture unit. And so, yes, we have a lot of sway in making sure that all of our stories have the proper context, tone, and intention. So, that's that's like number one. But number two is sort of the other things that we've done. So it's not just that we're serving as a review of our colleagues' work. It's also that we are a production unit that also produces stories and specials, sometimes on primetime, sometimes on streaming, stories that go out across all of the stations at CBS News. On top of that, we serve as an incubator in which we also help our colleagues pitch their stories, curate their stories so that they can get them on the air on all the different shows. And then, finally, our fourth thing is we serve as sort of a library. We run a website called CBS Village that has every diverse story that airs on CBS News is housed on this website. So it's a library. It's a place to go. You can see every diverse story that's been done at CBS News all in one place. So I consider that, and I'm someone that's been in the business for 34 years, so I know exactly how it was back then, and I know how it is now, and so it's truly, truly groundbreaking.
And Sabina, as a person who's like building out kind of a comparable structure, what are you taking away from this?
Well, for our unit, when it was started or began was about 2.5 years ago before I started. And the specials, Soul of a Nation specials that most of you guys probably have heard of, actually were driving this, our race and culture unit. And I think I was, I know I was put in place as a coordinator for race and culture to integrate our content into all the shows. I had a longstanding, producing experience at Good Morning America that, I was in the field, I booked, I produced big stories on the West Coast or all over the country and all over the world, actually. But I think they needed someone to get that content that we were producing so greatly on the specials to put in all our amazing shows. We have a number one show on the morning, Good Morning America. We have World News, it's the number one show in the whole country. Nightline that you worked for. And then now we have all these amazing streaming channels, right? And then we are also, meeting our audience on TikTok, on Instagram, on every social platform. So I think 18 months ago, I was put into this place, in this position to really integrate our content and really be diverse in how we implement stories in everyday life, right? And I think that's important, that we see that as a natural thing, organic thing for all our shows. And that's what we've been working on. I have one of my reporters here today, and he's part of the immigration unit. And it's really important because immigration is also everyday life. I was an immigrant of this country, and, to naturally see those story elements in everything that we do. And we're still working on it, and I think we're doing a great job. But just to have the privilege to be, covering these stories that should be natural to us, right? To be a reflection of our community every single day. But to do that on a number one network is pretty amazing.
There's a quote, I can't remember if it was in Shonda Rhimes' book, The Year of Yes, or at a talk that she did, where she talks about she's not interested in diversifying TV. She's interested in normalizing TV, right? And this idea that, actually, no, we live here too. And it doesn't need to be exceptional or unusual that we have these stories. And so, to your point about here's everything, because we're everything, or we're not just in specials, we're also in all of the shows, we're also in all of the programming. And, Ramon, your job is to make sure that folks like us get in the door, stay in the door, get paid for being in the door, and then have the opportunity to advance. How does your job help inform, enable the kinds of work that our colleagues here are describing?
Well, first of all, I congratulate both my colleagues on the great work they've done. All of this lifts the entire industry up. I think this has to be done collectively. We all work at different places, but We all have, I think, very common goals of lifting the profession and lifting the industry. For those who were ahead of us and those who are going to be, we're going to pull up with us. And that's something that I hope you take away from here today, that this doesn't happen by chance. If we all wait around and hope for things to change, guess what? They're not. You have to disrupt, you have to engage, and you have to actually participate in making these changes happen. And I will tell you that a couple of things I think are critical here. One, we have a race inequality unit. Most of the networks now all do, and a lot of the larger news organizations do. That's critical for making sure that we're looking at it as a nuance and a beat, just the way we do anything else, because of its importance in society. There's no doubt about that. But I think in addition to those things, there's a couple of keys. One, what we have attempted to do is you got to get everyone to agree on what is diversity. You'll be shocked how many people do not agree. I mean, you probably won't be. That's the first thing you get. I was head of diversity inclusion at CNN for 3 years, and my biggest takeaway was not everyone agrees on that word. Some people think it's a dirty word. Some people love that word. Some people are right in between. And I think the key is to get everyone on the same page. And here's what I've learned over time. Diversity is nothing without inclusion. And what it really means is it's the appreciation of difference, and it's unlocking its value. The appreciation of difference and unlocking its value. So diversity occurs everywhere in the world. It occurs in every species. It occurs on everywhere you turn. It's a naturally occurring phenomenon. There's diversity everywhere. But if you don't harness its value, then it sits dormant and it means nothing. So you can have a bunch of people in a room who might be all different in some way. But if you don't know and it's a mystery and no one offers up and no one says, hey, then you really can't take advantage of it. And what allows that to happen is culture. Meaning that people then feel kind of comfortable to be their complete selves, right? So at CNN, I do feel comfortable to come in and say, one, I was born in Arkansas. That's a shocker, isn't it? Two, that's where I was raised. Two, I'm Latino. Well, I think that's pretty obvious. There you go. Three, I'm gay. So I feel comfortable being my complete self. And I think the more that happens, then the more value you get in an organization. So to me, the key to this is you get to the point where people now feel really excited about being their complete self and don't feel jeopardized by offering that information up. Creating that culture is hard. It takes work. It's a long game. But guess what helps? Not having one, right? So at CNN now, where our U.S. domestic correspondent corps is 46% people of color. I mean, so when any EPs come to me, I'm like, oh, you have your choice of, half the group is so it really makes us better on every story. And then behind the scenes, same thing. You have to, the producers, the EPs, the jobs that they do are far. I hope one of the things that you come out of here is that you go and want to be a producer and a behind-the-scenes person that grows into being an executive producer because of the power in decision-making. You will decide what goes on the air, who's in the room, who gets to say it, who gets hired, who gets promoted. Think about how powerful that is. And we have a problem in this industry, which I will shout out because we're also on TV, to the world. Please choose producing in the route of management. I know everyone wants to be on TV and everyone wants to be on air. We do not have a problem with those job applications. If we were to say today, we're going to hire someone, all three of us are going to hire someone on the air, there'd be a line out the door, it'd wrap around the public library, wrap around the other one, wrap around the Lions, and then the producer line is really short. But that's where the power is. Every president of our news divisions was a producer. It's the route to management. So I would encourage that. And then the last thing I would say is we're trying to get to a point, and I hope you will see this on all our networks, where when you turn on a story, we did a story, I remember during the pandemic, that I saved because I used it in a class. And the story was about the supply chain and all the effect during the pandemic. And I use it in a class that we do at CNN and when I do them outside. And I asked the class, well, what did you notice? And someone said, well, everyone in that piece was a person of color. And it wasn't a story about people of color. It wasn't a story about diversity. It had nothing to do with it. It's just everyone in the story was a person of color, the doctor, the person who gave the analysis, the shop owner, the Coast Guard pilot, where we can get to a point where that's what we are doing, where you look up and see the general is a woman of color. The person here is from Kentucky. That to me is the goal that we have been trying to also get to, not just having our units give the nuance, but also making sure that we're mainstreaming and getting away from the mythology that the mainstream somehow doesn't include people of color.
Sabina, I feel like now that the spot of producers has been totally blown up, and everyone knows just how amazing you all are, I need you to sort of weigh in a little bit more on like the reality of some of those challenges and like making those things possible.
Well, I wanted just to add about the producing part versus the on-air part. I started in this business wanting to be on air. I did a fellowship in the Chicago Bureau, and I told you about this earlier, with Ron Schofield. He was the bureau chief at the time, a black man. I begged him to hire me, by the way. He wasn't going to hire me. I told him, I'll work for free. Just
Never
get
do
me
that.
this fellowship. Yes, don't do that. Don't do that.
Don't do that.
But he hired me, and he taught me every single thing about storytelling and the power of writing and the power of being able to be that producer behind the scenes and choosing those images that are so important when we tell a story. You know, I was in the streets of Chicago covering one event after the other, but I also came back and edited those stories, and I was able to choose the right people for those stories to tell the stories that we needed to tell. And I wouldn't have been who I am today if it wasn't for him, you know, and I do not regret choosing this path.
One of the things, you know, we're talking about like the power of behind the scenes, and as a person who has not worked in TV and finds being on camera terrifying, I can share a little bit of perspective about that, the power of packaging and distribution and the people who make those choices. You know, I've worked in digital. If for those of you who were here during the sizzle reel, you heard from Heaven, who used to be a producer and a writer for Colbert, saying, you know, she got the confidence to walk into Colbert's office and be like, "Hello, white people." And I worked with Heaven when we were at BuzzFeed, and there was a joke at BuzzFeed for a while that there were so many black people we didn't all have to pretend to like each other. Which is like a key step, right? Where we could like actively be like, no, like there's research about, you know, what you described as like there can't only be one. Like we have to move beyond a token number of folks, because when you have too numerically small a number of people, what happens is they become like the archetype. Right, they become like the black person, the Asian, the gay person, the person from Trinidad. There was like more than one of us, so that was fine. And the power of folks like Heaven and other folks that she works with is that she showed the rest of BuzzFeed and the other parts of BuzzFeed, like, actually, no, we're going to make different programming choices about the kinds of stories that we want to write. And we're going to make different choices around the kinds of videos that we want to be in, or, you know, how we're going to sound on podcasts, right? So you have like podcast voice, and then you have normal people and how everybody else speaks. And so I do think that if you find yourself in positions, and if you are on air, respect your producers, because they can make your life well, or they can make your life hell. But if you find yourself in these positions where you have the ability to make choices, like no choice in media is a small choice, right? Every single decision, whether it's about I'm going to do this story, I'm not going to do this story, or I'm going to describe somebody as an advocate or a critic rather than a lawyer or a doctor, these are choices that have consequences. And, you know, Alvin, you are a person who has spent every day making choices. Like we're up here right now and people are like texting you, asking you to make choices. What is that like in practice? You know, we've heard a little bit about the kinds of things that are possible, but what are the kinds of things you stop from happening?
Wow. Okay. I stop a lot of stuff from happening. I should say my team stops a lot from happening. And I should shout out my team, by the way. They're here.
Wave.
A good part of my team. Benita Sostre, my coordinating producer. Sharif Mawjood, my lead producer over there. And then our associate producer, Harry Forbes, is here. And we're missing one more who had a family emergency, Mark Weiner. But look, we stop things and we accentuate things. We really have the, I should say that we have the luxury as well as the power, as well as the respect around the network that if we think that something doesn't feel right or doesn't sound right, whether it has to do with language, whether it has to do with imagery, whether it has to do with the lack of context. Um, uh, those are the kinds of things that we weigh in on. And I should say that the reason that I'm hesitating is because there's so many stories that we have influenced, and I want to make sure that I don't sort of talk about something that
Theoretically
someone
speaking,
would
what's
sort of
like an
recognize.
abstract use case?
Yeah, so look, there have been instances where someone did a story, someone was looking to do a story about poverty, and for some reason, the only people that were in the first cut that we saw were people of color. There was another one where someone thought that it would be appropriate to have different, not enough people who represent all of our population in their piece, right? Everyone, all of the people who are sort of the saviors happen to be white. All of the good people, right? All the people that are doing all the good stuff, and then all of the people who are being helped happen to be of color. So there's anything from that nuance to language of possibly can we do you think we can use the N-word here? Can we use that appropriately? Can we so there's any number of things. But look, I don't want to hijack, but look, diversity is really having diversity in your newsroom is really about having the power to connect with communities, right? We live in the most diverse country in the world. So how can the reporters that are reporting in this country not be diverse, right? I mean, to me, it just makes absolute sense. So I want to give you one quick one. So remember when there were 4 Muslim men that were killed in New Mexico over the course of 6 months, and so last August, everyone thought, oh my goodness, hate crime. People are all, there are a bunch of white supremacists going around. They've killed 4 black men in New Mexico. I mean, four Muslim men down in New Mexico. What are we going to do about it? Well, our assignment desk was very purposeful, right? And so we asked a Muslim producer to go down to New Mexico, right? She happens to be a practicing Muslim who wears a hijab, and within 12 hours of going to New Mexico to that community, she found out, because she was able to speak to members of the community as well as family members, she found out that it was actually an internal family problem, and it was also a sectarian problem, right? Shia versus Sunni, right? And so within 12 hours, she sent us an email saying, this is not a hate crime, and she sort of laid it out. And 24 to 36 hours was when the FBI let everyone know, oh, it's not a hate crime. That's what diverse reporting is about, right? Without her, I don't know who we send down there. I don't know what they find out when they get there. I don't know if the community will trust that person. But the fact that we actually have people in our newsroom with that kind of ability and that kind of diversity, not only of thought, but she's based in LA, but she, I believe, grew up in the Midwest. All of those things come into play, right? So,
What strikes me there is, folks sometimes present the D word as a benefit, whereas a lot of the time the lack of it is like a liability, right? It means that there are straight up kinds of stories that we are less well equipped or completely unequipped to tell. It means that there are communities that we do not have real access to, either because there is a cultural barrier or a language barrier or just like not even knowing where to go. Queens, for example, not a monolith. I remember when I was moving to New York and I decided to live in Queens, and various of my colleagues at the place that I worked at the time were like, Queens, fascinating. as if it were like some random exotic Caribbean island. And and then talking to people from different neighborhoods and talking about the fact, well, actually, over here it's like predominantly Spanish speaking, and over here it's like Diwali, and the range of things in between. And yet so many of us have encountered situations, to go back to what you said, where folks don't even agree that there's a problem. So how in that environment do we move forward?
Well, of course, we need everyone in every community, but diversity also means applying diversity into stories that, relates to everybody. Pre-COVID, right before COVID happened, we didn't have a race and culture unit. I was always a champion for diversity, me and some other colleagues. But something that I don't think people even remember is that during COVID, when it first started, we only showcased white people, as patients and doctors. And, I was one of a few people at ABC who raised my hand and said, this is not America. This is not our communities. It's not a reflection of our communities. So I think that's also what diversity means, right? Diversity and inclusion is also implementing diversity in everyday type of storytelling. And I think that's really important.
Right, the normalizing.
It's interesting you mentioned Queens and the 7 line,
the best and the worst.
Yeah, the 7 line will take you. If you've been to Epcot, been to the World Showcase, the 7 line will kick that thing's butt. It's like the 7 lines, like the World Showcase, like 27 countries, 100 languages. You can stop. I always tell many of my colleagues, I said, you want an experience, come with me to Queens, and we're going to go on a food crawl.
It's the only place to eat in all of New York.
It is. If you want to go to 7 countries in one night on a food crawl, go to Queens. It's a lot of fun. I think this goes back to this diversity issue about getting everyone everyone that you work with. I think the breakthrough always comes when you can lay out for them that we don't do diversity, and it's a verb, right? Diversity, inclusion. We don't do them because they're the right thing to do or because it's politically correct. There's a whole group that will argue and fight that somewhere, but it's actually about journalism. It's actually about good journalism, to your point. You'd never walk into a room with a group of journalists and say, hey, today let's shoot for being accurate. What do you say, Sabine? Maybe today we'll be accurate. Everyone in the room would say, what are you talking about? That's our job. I think diversity and inclusion is part of that same attribute quality, which is if you don't have diversity and inclusion as a journalistic attribute, you're leaving stories on the table, you're missing voices. Stories won't be as good as they should be. They won't be as deep and as rich. And I do think we get into the diversity of every element, right? That includes point of view and politics and geography and all of those things, right? I remember being at MSNBC when I worked at NBC. I remember being there as an EP, and we were having a debate about guns. And it's always, to me, I think the thing you got to do as a journalist is always ask yourself, who's in the room? Mm-hmm. Who's in here with me making these decisions? So if you're going to have a conversation about guns and you're in a room with a certain group of folks, that might only be about gun control. Well, where are the gun owners and who owns a gun? And it's like, I remember sitting with some colleagues and you're like, gun owners. It's like, yeah, they exist and they're in our country, and and that's the Arkansas coming out in me, right? I had a lot of friends who owned a lot of guns. And that's one example. Another example, issues of religion, or which can be thorny. Education. You're in the room. Look around the room. Who's usually in the room when you're talking about education? I remember being in a room.
A bunch of people with master's degrees.
Right, exactly. And what do you think their number one issue is? Student loans. That's their number one issue, right? Which I get. That's an issue. But I looked in the room and there weren't a lot of parents. And so someone said, well, what are we going to do? I go get some parents. Yank some people in here. That back in the day when I was younger, I remember being in a room and saying, well, there's no one in here who of a certain group. And they looked at me and said, what should we do? I go, what about those photographers? I know that photographer has 3 children. Bring him in or bring her. So who's in the room? And I think that's an important question that all of you, and so you need to be in the room, but just because everyone in the room needs to have an official title, it's okay to go get others and make them and have them participate. But you have to do that. So, so much of this is incumbent upon you when you're in your role, as it is on us, to be pushing this culture, to be, disrupting where we can, but educating people on the issue of what diversity really means. I will look at a person at CNN, and I don't have to do this anymore because I think we've really, we have the buy-in now. But I remember sitting with folks and I would say to them, they'd say to me when I was head of diversity, well, Ramon, I want to hire the best person for the job.
Oh, God.
I'm like, what do you think I want to do? I want to hire the biggest knucklehead here, okay? No, of course not. What does that suggest to you? That their definition of what is the best is what needs to be unpacked. And the myth in diversity is that the default is not us, right? Because if I fail, I've heard people say, if a Latino fails, oh, see what happens when you hire a Latino? When a black person, see what happens? But when someone else fails, you don't hear someone say, oh my gosh, no, they just weren't good. So the myth is if we're able to get people to make that leap, and here's what works usually. I say to them, tell me someone you really love, and they tell me who they love, where they went to school. Great. Do you really want 10 of them? And they think about it, and at first they go, yes. And I go, really? Do you want 10 of that same exact thing? And they go, well, now that you mention it, no, I don't. That wouldn't make sense. I need someone to complement. So who are you missing? And what's your team like? And how do you put that together? And then you arrive at the conclusion that, well, the mythology of what I thought was the default position, they just blow it up and realize, no, it's all about how this all fits together and how these folks can make us richer and deeper. And at CNN, we talk about being the world's leader in news. And I tell people all the time, you can't be the world's leader in news if you don't look like the world.
That was technically half a show, but I'll let it go.
Yeah, sorry.
You've made the point earlier when we were emailing about this sort of same false juxtaposition, right? That there seems to be some sort of perceived choice between the best and not a white dude. Like, how have you confronted that?
I mean, it's interesting because the question that I get a lot now that I've been in the business for 34 years is, you must really have faced some unbelievable racism throughout your career. And to be honest, no one's running in a room and saying, calling you the N-word. What Ramon is talking about is what it's like, right? Early in my career, at least, it was about implicit bias, right? Somehow we're all
quiet racism.
Yeah, we're all in a meeting, and somehow all the white people, the executive producers and the powers that be, think that their ideas are better, right? And so after a while, it didn't take me very very long to catch on. But after a while, I decided, you know what, I'm gonna up my game. I'm this, I'm this polite, guy that's in a meeting, and somehow there are literally no rules for these white people who will continue to hammer home their point and their story ideas. Oh, and by the way, get them on. And so I upped my game. I didn't have any rules either. I didn't wait for my turn. I didn't, passively sit by and not have my my ideas considered. And so sometimes, especially in a business like this with a lot of type A personalities, you can't be a wallflower, right? Because people will just run over you.
We're gonna talk more about the perils of being a wallflower and the reality of being an introvert. But while we segue to that, I'm gonna give folks the opportunity to please we want to make sure that we hear all of your questions. There are definitely journalists in the room, so I know there's going to be questions. The way that we will do this, there is a mic right over there. Please do line up at the mic. This is a no comments disguised as questions and vice versa vibe. I will shut you down. That is my actual job, so don't even try it. Please form a line up there, and we will ask you to share your name, your organization, and your school, and we will kind of keep it moving that way. So, please feel free to start, or I will pick on one of the journalists who works for one of these people, and we'll have to go. But I want to go back to this idea of, like having to do work, because everything that all of you have described just seems like a job on top of a job. Sabina.
I just wanted to make sure, though, I know you're in recruiting and your job is actually to hire, the most excellent people and also bringing diversity. But you talked about this earlier when you were moderating about having a seat at the table and how some POCs feel like there's not enough space for all of us. And I think that narrative we have to change, right?
The table is actually way large.
Or if the table is not big enough, get another table, and also for other, POCs, Black, Hispanic, everyone to support each other and bring them with you. I think that's so important. It's everything I think I have enjoyed in this job specifically for the last almost 2 years is bringing up other POCs and actually making an impact in their life, and I hope I am, but to driving them to do the best work they can do.
Lift as you climb. Hi.
Hi, my name is Aria. I'm an intern for the Center for Communication, and I'm also a journalism student at NYU. Thank you all so much for speaking with us. So my question is that I really like what Alvin said about our diverse background being kind of the entry point to communities. I feel like I'm a Chinese immigrant and I speak the language. So a lot of times when I'm doing stories, I kind of turn towards these stories. I report a lot on Chinatown, and I feel like that's my advantage because I have access to that community. So when I'm doing job search and interviewing with people, I feel like I have to talk about that a lot, have to talk about my Chinese identity, and that's who I am. But I also don't want to be seen as just a Chinese woman. So how do you balance that out? How do you present yourself as a, a multi-dimensional journalist, human being, but also emphasize your diverse identity?
Go ahead,
Well, I mean, the way to do that is to always put journalism first, right? When you walk in that door and when you're having the interview, they know that you're Asian American. So, it's really about all of the skills that you bring to the table. Oh, and by the way, right, I speak Mandarin, Cantonese, or whatever, and I grew up in certain communities, right? So that should be the sort of secondary thing. The first thing should really be I'm competent. I'm curious. I love, to tell stories, and I like to also, tell stories about a community that I came from. So, that's always the focus. Journalism first, and then everything else will follow. We want to know that you're smart. We want to know that you're curious. We want to know that you're hungry. We want to know that you're hardworking.
Accurate.
We want all of that. Yeah, accurate. Yeah, truthful. Yeah, now we have to say stuff like that because there's an entire network that's based on lies. So yeah. So yeah. So
That's not present.
So next question.
Hi, my name is Shanice Ruel. I'm also an intern here for CFC, and I go to University of Connecticut. My question was that I feel like in this new generation, we mention more about mental health now, and coming into this industry, I feel like I struggle a lot with that sometimes. So I was wondering what you guys take is on that, especially back then where I feel like it wasn't talked as much before.
Ramon, I'm going to ask you to talk about this from the recruiting perspective, and then I can
Sure. I mean, it's a great question and a great observation and a real reality. Mental health and work-life balance and how these things all kind of work within each other have been areas that our predecessors, I don't think, talked enough about. And I think those of us who may have grown up and were coached by them, there was this own internal inertia around work. It's the job, it's the career, how you can climb up. And, this was we even heard talk about working for free. I haven't heard that in a long time. I mean, that's the way it used to be.
I did get paid.
Well,
just
right.
to clarify.
And that was just plain wrong, right? And the group that suffered the most, you know who it was. Because this industry was built on apprenticeship and who you knew and all of that, And all that had to be disrupted. And part of that disruption came in helping people understand that there had to be mental health, there had to be work-life balance. I think the issue here, we have, unfortunately in this business, this is something you have to really embrace, and I would urge all of you to embrace early in your careers, about the decisions around what's important to you. And you need to make those decisions. What are your non-negotiables? Getting into relationships and then not having an understanding with the person you're in a relationship with about what the boundaries are with work and not work. Those of you who are in journalism, who are even on the reporting end, some of you, there are people at CNN who literally travel 220 days, 240 days out of the year. I had a reporter who once told a group, don't buy fruit. That's the kind of practical advice, right? But you have to decide how important these things are and look at organizations. And when you do interviews and when you talk to people, what is their culture? Who are you going to be working for? Do they care about these things? Are these things important to them? It's really so important how you study where you're going to work. I see reporters and journalists all the time come up to me and ask questions, and I go, do the homework on the place that you're going to work for.
Yes.
Some of you want to work in New York or LA, and you want to work at the networks, and I get it. But think about and really study the people who you're interviewing with and know what's important to them. And ask this question straight up about it if it's important to you. I really believe that's a question. I mean, flexibility after the pandemic is something we're very proud of, the fact that we now have that flex time. But I know some of you want to jump in on this.
Yeah, well, what I will say is that, look, as I said, I've been in the business for 34 years, and we did not care. When I came into the business, we didn't care how anybody felt, right? Before Columbine, there was a mass shooting in Paducah, Kentucky that I covered when I was a young producer, and it was jarring. And as a journalist, no one cared that we were covering it day in, day out, on the ground, talking to people and living this sort of nightmare. And one of the things that I think is great about today is, at least at CBS, and I'm sure at ABC and CNN and all the other networks, everyone, there is support now for journalists that are out there. The assignment desk will cycle through reporters and producers so that they're not on the scene for extended periods of time. And there's also, there are also therapists and all these kinds of services for people, because, in the past, no one really thought journalists, were human. I mean, we're just sort of like covering stuff.
Copy machines.
Yeah, exactly. And then one more quick point about Ramon, only because my son is here and so is my wife.
Do you travel a lot?
Well, yeah. Well, that's my point. I'm looking at my son, and he was born in 1990, and in 1990, at the end of 1990, we went to our tax person, and our tax person told us that I was on the road for 193 days. In 1990, when my son was born. My son was born in November 1990. That means my wife was alone for 193 days.
Shout out to your wife.
Do you have something to say to her?
That's how.
Something you'd like to say?
Just want to acknowledge.
And I'll never forget, I was like, I'm sorry, what? I was like astounded. So the point is you have to make choices. Sometimes they're bad choices. But having a great partner to work through it can be very helpful. But yeah, thank goodness today there's more support and more services than in the past. Because trust me, when I was coming up, nobody cared, but people care today.
Absolutely true.
It's great how great minds think alike, but I just wanted to mention that, my daughter is here today. She's 25. I don't want to age myself, but I did have her when I was 5. Wow. So, but she is actually the one who taught me about mental health. And I think that's important. She's actually got me on, front of the line on big stories because of the way she thinks. But, when I started, and I grew up pretty much at ABC. I worked, I think maybe 300 days, 365 days. I was never in the office. And it's like you said, people didn't think we were human. But I also was this person who, just recently a single mom. I wanted to prove myself. And I just felt with every story, I wanted to do better. And I didn't even think about my mental health until I had children, which is really crazy. But, she is very much into the social, media and all of that, and taught me so much about it. But one thing that the younger generation is so great at is being so open and transparent about mental health, right? So I feel like I've been taught so much just by, seeing her grow up and, teaching me that every single day. And I'm grateful that you're here. You can judge me later.
Just judging you now.
Hi, my name is Naisha. I'm a freshman at NYU. I'm studying journalism and Spanish and linguistics. So something to what you mentioned earlier about a lot of decisions revolving people of color and just, diversity happen after the fact. They happen as a response to things that have happened around the world. And you mentioned trying to find people, to make the room represent the world and the nation that you're reporting for. So how would you, what tips do you have to make the room, I guess, more proactively inclusive and more proactively diverse instead of, waiting until after the fact and making it a reaction to something that's happened?
I will say that my reflex, and this is why I don't always get to do panels, but my reflex when I'm confronted with this question is like, what we're basically talking about is like how to make people less racist a lot of the time, or ableist, or homophobic, or kind of like pick a thing that we tend to deny is true about ourselves. And to the point that you were making earlier, it's very hard to do that individually. You have to design cultures that have both incentives and accountability. And you can do that from the top down, you can do that from the bottom up. So like a top down thing is managers or editors or hiring managers being told, unless our incoming, like for everybody we hire in a given year, like some amount of that intake of new folks has to actually be representative of the state that we're covering, or the country, or whatever that thing is. Great, that's a goal, but if it's not, none of you get a bonus. And then suddenly people are like, oh, I'm not going to make as much money, therefore I'm going to care more, right? So I think for the positions that we're in, a lot of us in more senior roles have the ability to design like from the top down level. I think from the bottom up level, especially folks coming in at like the entry level, or who are trying to get into the rooms, or who are like trying to figure out if there's even a door, it's what Sabina said, which is coalition building. Some of you will say unions. I didn't say unions. I said coalition building. And the idea of you've got to find the other folks who agree, sympathize, empathize, and are willing to use your, individual and collective, like personal and social capital to advocate for something. Because I've also seen extremely well-meaning initiatives go awry because nobody actually felt invested in moving it forward. It was more like a conversation that everybody was happy to have, but nobody was on the hook for doing it. So, love to hear from them.
I would just add, to this point, I called it building your constituency.
Yes.
Anywhere you go, and by the way, I think you should do this in your career, right? I have people I can turn to, as I'm sure all of them do, when you have to make big choices in your career, or even when you're to bounce something off. I call that my kitchen cabinet. But everywhere I go and everywhere I've worked, I look for champions, I look for colleagues, I look for allies. And because 2 is better than 1, 4 is better than 2, and you start finding where those places are. And by the way, you'll find them in some of the most counterintuitive places. All right? It doesn't, I just don't have to, everyone who's going to be my ally doesn't have to be Latino. I have plenty of white male allies. And by the way, I seek them out because they get into places perhaps that I can't, and can influence the way I can't. So I would think about that. And the last thing I would say to you is this, and goes back to, I think, what Aria said too. Thank you. Who and where you came from and what you are is a gift and an asset. And don't let anybody tell you differently. Don't let anyone ever tell you that where you came from and who you are is a liability. It's an asset. And everywhere you go, that place grows by you. And I try to tell people all the time, don't come to CNN or any other network and try to adjust to them.
Because they will break you. Just to be clear.
Be who you are, and they're now better because of you. Please remember that. I learned that at a very young age from my mom. You know, the immigrant woman who didn't finish the fifth grade, who came from Colombia to New York. She taught me that. She turned me into a diversity officer at the age of 6, saying, "Hey, this is going to happen. Be ready." And she was so right. And it's going to happen to you. It happened to me in college when someone told me, "Why do you talk so much about diversity?" Or trying to tell you how to be Asian, or you're too Asian. Don't let anybody do that. Be proud of who you are.
Thank you. I'm going to let you go.
Yeah, I just had one quick thing. Look, it's really about the people who were in the decision-making roles. And, you know, it's interesting. Look, I'm an executive producer, but I've been an executive producer before. And I normally inherited teams. I inherited other people's, teams. But this is really the first time that I've had a chance to build my own team, right? And so that's why my team is Christian and Jewish and Muslim. That's why it's millennial and Gen X and baby boomer. That's why it's Black and white and Latina and South Asian, right? Because I have the power to actually do it now. So that's one of the great things that's sort of happened, certainly in the last 5 to 10 years.
I'm glad you used the word power, because essentially all conversations about diversity are conversations about power, right? Like who gets to have it, who gets to wield it, who is punished for wielding it, who is encouraged to wield it. And so when you're in a position where you can wield it in a large or small amounts, you're like,
Very House of the Dragon. You sound like you're doing Game of
No,
Thrones.
I'm watching Rings of Power. So like the other one that cost $1 billion to make. We got a question from the audience, which I do want to emphasize because it is something that I feel strongly about. And the question is, and I'm going to, Ramon, I'm going to start with you because it is a hiring question. Yeah. Which is, how do you approach hiring people with physical disabilities or people who come from neurodiverse backgrounds? And how do you think about, and this is a question for both of you, coverage as it relates to this? So like one thing that has happened during the pandemic is multiple media organizations, I'm thinking of like the 19th, for example, now have disability desks. Yep. Some of which are staffed by reporters who will describe themselves as like people with different types of disabilities. And that has been like a step change for a lot of places. Thank you for the question.
Thank you for the question. I think this is a really important question for us and for all of us up here. This is definitely where when we start thinking about diversity and its definition, where there has been, I think, a lack of inclusion. In terms of neurodiversity, disability, and the way we think about that as diversity, absolutely part of the diversity. I think for us, what we've tried to do is partner with organizations that really have done some pioneering work here and have now included them in the way we think about how we interview. Mm-hmm. Is the interview, a lot of times the way interviews are set up and the way the process is set up is exclusionary. The whole concept of institutional discrimination is sort of at play here, that you build institutions in ways that exclude people. And I think definitely in terms of neurodiversity and disability, literally, physically, we're building places that say, don't apply.
For folks who are faced with the disclosure part of a job application, not being sure whether you should disclose and then risk being discriminated against, or not disclose and then have to disclose later and having an equally challenging conversation afterward.
That's a great question, and I mentioned our website, CBS Village, and up until Benita, help me out. 4 months ago, up until 4 months ago. So we have tabs, justice. Thank you. So we have tabs, right, for all the different types of stories that we've done. We have justice. We've got AAPI. We've got Latino. We've got religion, and we didn't have a disability tab. And one of my colleagues, and I have a kitchen cabinet too for areas where I go around the network and I say to myself, this is out of my depth. Can you help me? And so one of my colleagues, he works for 48 Hours. His name is Michael. Started writing us all these emails and was like, "You guys don't have a disability tab. Like, what's going on?" And I was like, "I'll admit, for the first couple times that he emailed me, I was busy, and then I was like, he sent like 4 or 5 emails, and I was like, oh, okay." And so Benita, who runs our website, said, "Hey, we need to try to get this on." And what we realized was that we actually did a tremendous amount of stories on disability, but we didn't have it in a place where everyone could see it. And so that's a great example of a colleague, a disabled colleague, who pushed us to actually do something about it. And today we have, not only is there a tab, but we are now more mindful about how we report on people with disabilities, and it runs the gamut from all types of disabilities. So I'm very, very proud of that.
I want to go back to something that came up around like reporting out the organizations that you want to work for to make sure it sort of aligns with what you care about. More and more places have public style guides. Shout out to BuzzFeed, who was one of the first teams to do that. And what is in or is not in a style guide is often a very powerful indicator of what a media organization thinks is like important and how they think about those things. And so whether it's around, how we talk about disabilities or how we talk about people with disabilities and what the styles are, or even the existence of, as you say, like a tab or a section, you often, even before you get to the point of talking to somebody who works at a media organization, can really start to tell. I have a product design and tech background, and so I can go to somebody's websites and know in like 5 seconds if they care at all about people who need a screen reader, or people who might have problems with flashing lights, or graphics that move. And I know enough people in media, like I'm the person who's emailing 4 times. I'm like, "Hi," just noting something on your homepage. So there are all different elements to this conversation, and no one of us is only ever like one piece of it. So I'm going to follow up on a question that I was asking you all earlier, because this was something that was posed to me at one of the last panels I did, which was, how come some of us have to do so much more work to make organizations the kinds of places that mean future us can do less work?
I mean,
Go ahead.
Sorry. Well, one of my colleagues are here, and also a very dear friend. We have this conversation, I think, every single day.
Yeah.
And let's not remind everyone that I said I'll work for free for 3 months. So that's who I am in that conversation. I don't know. It's a hard question for me, right? Because I grew up in the sort of older era of journalism, right? I've been in, I know it doesn't look like it, but I've been in TV for a very long time. When I grew up in television, it was just work, right? And I thought it was my responsibility, to carry that, not just to show everyone I belonged, but to work so hard and so effectively that I belonged in the room, that I belonged in the newsroom. I'm allowed to be here also. And that's why I worked so hard. And it was that mentality that I wasn't good enough, right? Maybe someone said that to me. Maybe they didn't, or maybe that was just my culture. And that's something that we face now, right? With the differences of the young people now coming in, teaching us that we are okay, and all we want and need is equality, right? Nothing less, nothing more. And I think that's something that I struggle with, and I know my team will tell you this. I'm going to always forever be a workaholic. I blame it on the ballet career. But I think it's, the age that we grew up in. Mm-hmm. It was not okay to be sick. It was not okay to take 3 weeks of vacation, And also, I think for me personally, and this is just for me personally, I didn't want to lose that opportunity. Because what if I was away and we didn't cover that story that we needed to cover? Or what if I was away and I didn't get the opportunity to get on a plane to go to Thailand? I never wanted to lose the opportunity.
I go back to mi mamá, Blanca Escobar, who laid it out to me this way. She said to me, "You have been given an education. We have fought for you. We have sacrificed for you. And she said, now you have to make a choice. It's up to you now. What are you going to do? And she said, if you are going to wait for the world to be fair, you are going to wait your entire life. And she said, and I want you to think about what it is to be a leader. Because my mom ended up running, she owned 3 restaurants in Queens, never finished the 5th grade, but had a payroll and a budget of, and had 3 restaurants and 200 people she had to manage. And I was in awe, and I'm in awe every day when I think about all that she sacrificed and did. And she used to tell me about how she had to tell employees, you know, she had to get them out of bed and, you know, they would whine about vacation and they would do this. And so when I got my first job in leadership in television, I went to her and I said, can you give me some advice? And she said, well, you know, I didn't study journalism. I don't have a college degree. I do watch Oprah, but, you know. And she said, but you're going to lead people now. I go, yes. I go, how many people? I go, I got about 25. She goes, okay, that's good size. And I was young. And she said, well, you know, leadership's a choice. You don't have to do it. I go, but if you're going to wait for it to be fair, I go, people, you know, they say people meet you halfway. She goes, they won't meet you halfway. They won't even meet you. You're going to have to yank them out of bed. You're going to have to meet them 110% of the way in. And she said, so, but that's a choice. I go, but that choice has rewards. And you know, we didn't raise you so that you know, wouldn't lead, but it's your choice. And there's going to be some stuff that's really unfair, but once you get over it, you'll realize how powerful it can be. And I that stays with me. Here's the only caveat I would add to that. As I've learned over the years, what I do not reward is laziness from my colleagues. If someone comes to me and asks for help about something involving people of color or culture or Latino community, my mom taught me this: never underestimate how stupid smart people are. Never underestimate how stupid smart people are. She said, you'll have people with these great educations, and then they start talking about Latino issues or something, and you know, and they can't spell, you know, they still spell Colombia with a U. Stop it. Colombia. It's Colombia. And anyway, so, but you know, these are Harvard educated people. It's like geography, folks. But the point is, she taught me you could smack into those people or you can teach them. It's a lot harder to teach them. It's not fair. But one of the things I've learned over time is if you put investment and your intentions are good and you put investment in learning, then I will help you. But if you come at me with ignorance, I do push back now and say, why do I have to help you understand something that you could have figured out by Googling 5 seconds ago? I am not your walking Latino encyclopedia because you are not, you know, showing enough initiative to learn about why Cinco de Mayo nobody cares about. Or, you know, so I do think that that's something that, you know, that's not fair. You know, this is something I know, and you could know it too. So I need to see some level of engagement to then do what my mom said. If I don't, then I'm pushed back saying, hey, come on, this is basic stuff. You're showing ignorance. So that's my thought on that.
I love that. I feel like we're just going to be like, do better. And then we'll end there. Thank you all.